Let's start it. Starting. But we chose the event live. We're live. Excellent. Okay. So we're going to study about Chanukah. Happy Chanukah. You see we have the one candle because the first day of Chanukah. So because even though it's not night, but when we gather together, we want to remember it's Chanukah, so we make sure there's a menorah with a candle, a light. We are going to discuss what perhaps not everybody knows. Everyone knows about Chanukah. And we know that Chanukah is a holiday of 8 days because when the Jews were victorious over the Greeks, page number 208, the Jews were victorious over the Greeks, they came to the Beit HaMikdash, they came to the Holy Temple, and they wanted to rekindle the menorah, which they weren't able to do till then because the Greeks had control over the Beit HaMikdash. And they looked for a pure oil. The oil lasted, which was supposed to be for 1 day, it had to be pure with a seal of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, and it was supposed to last for 1 day. They knew it would take them 8 days to get new oil, but they figured they should do the mitzvah. Nonetheless, they lit the oil, and miraculously it lasted for 8 days, and we have Chanukah. And we know that we light the lights of Chanukah. The first night we light one light, and every subsequent night we light another light till we get to the grand finale on the 8th day of Chanukah, where we light 8 candles of Chanukah, which reminds us of the 8 days of miracle. And that is the standard way that we light the menorah. But there is another opinion, which is not as well known. And this we see in the Gemara, in the Talmud, text 1a. Our rabbis taught the mitzvah of Chanukah demands 1 light for a man and his household. So technically the base mitzvah is that for the 8 days of Chanukah, each house has 1 candle. So you would have to buy a box of candles of 8 candles. However, those who beautify the mitzvah kindle a light for each member of the household. So each person is going to light their own menorah, certainly each man. And concerning those who beautify it more than that, Beit Shammai says, on the first day, light 8, and after that gradually reduce. So on the 8th day of Chanukah, you will be lighting 1. But Beit Hillel says, on the first day 1 is lit, and thereafter they are progressively increased. So whose opinion do we follow? Not the opinion of Beit Shammai who says the first day light 8 and then go downwards. We follow the opinion of Beit Hillel. We light 1, and then we progress upwards. Now, most of us, I hope, are optimistic people. Which way sounds more optimistic to you? Starting with 1 and going up. It shows that we start maybe small. At every birth of a child, when they have the bris, we say, Zeh hakatan gadol yeh. This little guy can be a big guy. And perhaps if we're talking about the cycle of life, sometimes the sadness, you could say, of life is that big people start getting smaller, shrinking, and sometimes they get ill and they shrivel away. So usually we're used to thinking, I shouldn't say bigger is better. In technology, smaller is better. The chips keep getting smaller and smaller. There's this little caricature that they show about how it was 30 years ago and how it is now. 30 years ago when computers were coming out, the computers were huge, the people were small. Now, the computers are tiny and the people are bigger. At any rate, so let's see what's the school of thought. What are they thinking here? What's the rationale behind the argument? They're both talking about, they're both born within 100 years, but Shammai and Hillel lived less than 100 years after the story of Chanukah. So they're very 50, 60 years after. So they're very close to the actual historical event that they're commemorating. There's no argument between them about the fact. The fact is, they lit the menorah, it was enough for 1 day, it lasted for 8 days. It was a miracle. But the question is how to commemorate the fact. How did the rabbis want us to commemorate it? About that, there was still room for an argument. So here the Gemara continues and clarifies what the argument is. Ullah said, in Israel, 2 scholars, Rabbi Yossi the son of Avin and Rabbi Yossi the son of Zevida, argue. They are going to argue about what the rationale is behind Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. One maintains the reason of Beit Shammai, who says 8 down to 1, is that it should correspond to the days still to come. So you have today, how many days of Chanukah do you have left? 8. So today we should light 8. And the reason of Beit Hillel is that it should correspond to the days that have already passed. Today we just have 1 day of Chanukah. Perhaps we could paraphrase that. This is just a translation of the Gemara. Perhaps we can paraphrase like that. If we looked at the oil today in the Beit HaMikdash, look at the oil, it's enough for 1 day. But after Chanukah, once you saw that it lit for 8 days, if you go back to that cruise of oil, you do rewind on your video and you look again at that little jug of oil, you will see that that oil has 8 days of burning time in it, miraculously, because it lasted for 8 days. So that means on the first day, there was still 8 days of potential burning in there. You look at the 7th day, there's only 7 days left. So in other words, Beit Shammai is telling us, let's look at the miraculousness in the oil, and every day that's going down. The last day is the least miracle because it lasts for 1 day. Beit Hillel says, no. Look, the first day, the second day, it lasted for 2 days already. It's another miracle. And the 8th day, that's huge. Okay, so one looks at it, and we'll go a little bit more into that soon. The other scholar maintains, Beit Shammai's reason is that it should correspond to the bull offering of Sukkot. The cows, male cows, bulls, oxen, were offered on Sukkot. How was that done in the Beit HaMikdash? The first day of Sukkot, there were 13 oxen offered. Second day of Sukkot, 12. Third day, 11. Fourth day, 10. Fifth day, 9. Sixth day, 8. Seventh day, 7. Now you quick at mathematics. 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10 plus 11 plus 12. It should be 7 days of Sukkot, so we got it wrong here. One second. I'm going down. 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. Okay, so we add 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It comes out to 70. The reason for that is it corresponds to the 70 nations of the world. And on Sukkot, we also pray for the entire world. So throughout the 7 days of Sukkot, we offer up 70 oxen, which corresponds to the 70 nations of the world, and this is a source of blessing for them. So much so that our sages told us, if the non-Jews would know how much blessing they are getting from our prayers in the Beit HaMikdash, they would set up a whole honor guard around it to make sure nobody can disturb it. Not just they wouldn't destroy it, they would protect it. So that's Beit Shammai's reasoning. He says, same way on Sukkot we go down, we have a precedent. On Chanukah also we can go down. But Beit Hillel's reason is that we increase in matters of sanctity, but never decrease. Should always try and do better. Well, that seems to us to be more readily understandable. Always get better. We would want to understand what is the concept here of lighting all 8 and then going down. So we're going to try and delve into the rationale behind that. First, let's understand that in general, these arguments are not just in the matter of Chanukah. There's a difference of approach between Shammai and Hillel. As the story probably many of you have heard in here in text 2. It happened that a certain non-Jew came before Shammai and said to him, "Convert me on the condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot." Shammai chased him away with the builder's measuring tool that was in his hand. And the commentaries say he was showing him the measuring tool means that there's so many details that when you measure something, just to be exact. What are you coming with this preposterous request? I should teach you the Torah on one foot. It's full of so many details. If you're not ready to really get into it and accept it, off with you. The same fellow came before Hillel, and Hillel converted him, saying, "That which is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow." This is the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. In other words, he turned to him with compassion. He understood that he was still small-minded, he still didn't get it. So he gave him an entry gave him an entry into the Torah, and obviously through that he came to observance of all the mitzvot, and he became a proper Jewish person. But there's a difference in approach. One is more strict, one is more compassionate. Now, important to point out that strictness, Shammai was not wrong there, and Hillel was not right. It's not a wrong and a right, it's a different approach. We all know, if we were to look at parenting, God willing, there are those that are parents, there will be parents, God willing. In parenting, there's very often a strict parent and a more lenient parent. And that is fine. However, the one thing that needs to be is that both parents never contradict the other one. Because the strictness is not wrong, the compassion is not wrong, but when they're two parts of a wholesome system, they can be very valuable. Because you need to be strict at times. If the parent can go, uh-oh, and the kid will be scared to go closer to fire, great. On the other hand, when the kid needs consoling, needs a hug, maybe the more compassionate parent can do that more effectively because the kid feels more comforted by that parent. So, but the only pitfall is if one contradicts the other, that unfortunately probably happens more in divorced parents, where they're not working in tandem. The aspect of the relationship has fallen apart between them. Usually in a healthy marriage, the parenting will be a joint venture. One is more strict, it's not that one is wrong and one is right. There are two aspects. So here too, Shammai wasn't wrong. It's true. You want to become Jewish, you have to accept all the mitzvahs. It's not easy. Hillel wasn't saying that you don't need that, but each one was coming from their perspective. And in this case, that person needed the compassion. So how does this fit in to, how is this going to fit in when it comes to this argument? How does that fit how does that fit us? So let's see another argument. There's another argument that there's another argument here. Text number 6. Our rabbis taught. For 2.5 years, the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel were in dispute. The former, in other words, the school of Shammai said it would be better for man not to have been created than to have been created. The latter, Beit Hillel, saying it's better for man to have been created than not to have been created. And what we're saying here is that, you see, what happens is when a soul is created, and it doesn't yet come down into the world, you see, the world gives a tremendous opportunity for a soul. What is the opportunity that we get? Why are we so happy when somebody's born? I mean, wouldn't it be better just to be in heaven where we were before we were born? Or to go back to heaven? Because why are we happy when we're born? What's the added value that we can do mitzvot? In other words, Hashem's commandments come from a holiness that's higher even than the holiness of our souls. So for our soul's benefit, even though they're spiritual beings and they were up there in heaven, they're going back to heaven. By going through this world and doing Hashem's commandments here in this world, physical things, not killing, not stealing, putting on tefillin, praying, eating, making kiddush on Shabbos, lighting candles, all those physical things, while they feel much lower than spirituality, they are actually God's wish for us in creation. And God's wish emanates from very deep, so to speak, in God Himself. As we know, desire comes from a very deep place. And it's God's desire that we fulfill mundane and physical mitzvot here in this world. So our spiritual soul gets a lift by coming down here below. But there's also pitfalls. There's a lot of challenges. Because the same way there's mitzvot, there are those little distractions. Little distractions called temptations, which make that many don't really get to do as many mitzvot as they thought they would do before they were born, because they didn't realize they're going to be distracted. Yes, it's an opportunity to do a good thing, but hey, it's not so easy in this world. Many things call to us, try and distract us. But Beit Shammai says, you know what? That soul that's ready to come down in the world, it'll be really, in a way, better if it wouldn't come down. Because already potentially, he has a connection to the mitzvot, but he can't mess up. He hasn't messed up yet. Beit Hillel says, no, it's much better to be created, to come down in this world, because potentially is one thing, but we don't live life based on potential. We need to see actuality, fulfillment. So let's understand here that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and we can go, the class here will not be long enough to go through the various arguments of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, but what that will lead us to is that we can look at their whole argument as being really one argument. Do we look at potential or fulfillment? In other words, let's go back to the oil. If we look on the first day of Chanukah, how much potential miracle is in that oil? 8 days. But in actuality, how long has it burnt? 1 day or 2 days. So the question is, are we going to look at the potential and celebrate and mark the potential, or are we going to look at actuality? Beit Shammai says, look at the potential. Beit Hillel says, we're going to do, thank you, we're going to wait for the actuality. We're going to wait for the reality to be fulfilled. And so that we see again in their argument, better to be born, better not to be born. Beit Hillel says, we need, it's not enough that the soul is linked somehow or prepared somehow to come down into this world. That's only a potential. We need the soul to actually come down and fulfill its potential and actualize its potential. Only then can we celebrate it, only then does it achieve its fulfillment. And there are various arguments throughout the Talmud which you could read and you can understand. You will understand, if you understand this concept, that this is their argument, you will see that that is the argument, that's the basis and the soul of the argument in every place in the Talmud. I'll show you one more place that we have a quote here for, and you'll see in text number 8. We have a Mishnah, the last tractate of the Mishnah, of the entire book of Mishnah, talking about the fact that there are some things that are susceptible to becoming impure. This is ritual impurity, tum'ah. There are some things that become susceptible. They can receive impurity only when they are liquid. So there are some things that receive. So the question is about honeycombs. Are honeycombs considered solids, and therefore, if no other liquids touched it, it would not yet be susceptible, ra'ui, mukhshar, it would not yet be possible for it to become impure? Or are they considered liquids? Now, honeycomb is solid honey. It's solid matter with honey inside. When you break open the honeycomb, you have liquid honey that oozes out of it. The question is this now considered a solid or a liquid? When I still have the complete honeycomb. So, Beit Shammai says, once, this is a question of potential or actual. Beit Shammai says, once one stirs it up by either smoking the bees out or heating it, it becomes considered as if liquid, and therefore it becomes susceptible to becoming impure. Beit Hillel says no, once it breaks apart, once you break it apart to remove the honey, then it's considered, then it's touched liquids. Again, is it only when the potential is there, you've done something to express the potential, or do you need to wait till the actual? Beit Shammai says potential, Beit Hillel says it needs to be actualized. And this is the basis, therefore, of the argument about the days of Chanukah. Do we look at the potential for miracle in this oil? And on the first day of Chanukah, potentially the strength that was there. We didn't see it yet, but afterwards we know that there was a potential miracle of 8 days, and every day it got less. Or do we look at the actuality? And the actuality means that every day the miracle got more and more, and therefore we would start with one and ascend daily. Now, interesting, now that we talk about Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, there's another fascinating thing. And here we pointed out in text number 4. Who is the law like? Who do we follow? Well, you know, in Chanukah we follow Beit Hillel. We like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in general, how did the rabbis decide who they should go like? These are both two great sages, Shammai and Hillel. So the Gemara tells a fascinating story. For 3 years, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai argued. One said the halacha is like us. The other said the halacha is like us. A heavenly voice spoke. These and these are the words of the living God. They are both correct on some level, and the halacha follows the house of Hillel. The heavenly voice said, the halacha, the Jewish law, follows the house of Hillel. A question was raised. Okay, since the heavenly voice declared both these and those are the words of living God, in other words, they're both true in heaven, why was Jewish law, the halacha, established to follow the opinion of Hillel? And the answer the Gemara gives is, it is because the students of Hillel were kind and gracious. They taught their own ideas as well as the ideas from the students of Shammai. Not only that, they went so far as to teach Shammai's opinions first. Now, let's ask, how does that work? Shouldn't Jewish law be based on those that are smarter, that are sharper? They're going to obviously know what Jewish law should be, what Hashem intended. So it would seem that Shammai's yeshiva was smarter, sharper. We're saying that Hillel's, they were kind and gracious. But if halacha is Jewish law and we want to get to the truth, why would we be following somebody because he's kind and gracious? Why wouldn't we be looking for the one that's sharpest and the one that's more objectively correct? You know what the answer is? Halacha is the desire, the wish of God on this world. In other words, what is Jewish law? What does it mean, Jewish law? Jewish law means Hashem said He wants us to live in a particular way, to do this, not to do that. And so we have that which is written, we have that which is added, we have the enactments of the sages. But we want to know, Almighty God, Father in heaven, what way is going to, so to speak, put a smile on your face? What way do you want us to do it? Can you imagine you're doing something for a parent, and they told you to make me dinner. You really want to know what they want to eat. It's not up to you. You're making them dinner because they asked for it. So ask them, so how is it? In what way do you want it? So it would seem you'd want the smartest people on the team to figure it out. You need the nicest people. Why the nicest people? Because here's a very, very important lesson. To truly be open up to sense and be able to transmit the Word of God, there's a great value on humility, which is expressed by kind and graciousness. When somebody's kind and gracious, and they said they even taught Shammai's opinions first, it means that they are more humble. It means they are more open to the holiness of the Torah. If you want to know what Hashem wants, it's not just about brains. It needs to also be about your submissiveness, your humility, your openness to receiving the Word of God. Which is why we have a very interesting concept when it comes to Torah. So let's start with the mathematics. If the mathematics professor has been found to be an immoral person, he's having relationships that he shouldn't be having. Is there a problem to study mathematics from him? Or is the mathematics you studied from him suspect? No. He may be a great mathematician, maybe a lousy ethicist, an immoral person. What about Torah? About Torah it says you cannot study Torah from somebody who's immoral. But he may be brilliant. Torah is about the transmission of the Word of God. The Word of God requires not just brains. It's more than that. There's something deeper that's being transmitted. It requires a humility. It requires a greatness of character. It requires the ability to be more transparent and more open to the transmittal, to the reception and transmittal of God's Word. So the halacha is like Beis Hillel, the law is like Beis Hillel, because Beis Hillel were more humble, more gracious, more kind. But generally speaking, again, the heavenly voice confirmed both opinions have their source in heaven. They're both right. They're both Torah. So why is it, if they're both right, why does Beit Shammai usually become more strict, Beit Hillel more lenient? So take a look here in text 5. Not text 5. We have it from the Tanya we have it here in the Tanya from in text 9. Like parents, like we talked about, two different parents. Well, why is that? Different natures. It's a balance. Where does that come from? It comes from their natures. Here, the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman in text 9 says, among divine servants there are 2 degrees and levels, which, depending on the root of their soul above, are distinct in relation to the categories of the right and the left. That is, the characteristic of the left, which is usually severity, strictness, is the trait of contraction, tzimtzum, and concealment in divine service. From this attribute derives also the aspect of contraction and limitation in divine service. For example, with charity to judge according to the means, and we know there's a rule, if somebody spends more than a tenth, he shouldn't spend more than 1/5. So there's a strictness, there's an exactness. And likewise, as regards to the study of Torah and the other commandments, he makes do with discharging his duty, the definite duty to which the Torah obliges him to appoint times, to make set times for study. In other words, there's a strictness which a person may have in his soul, deriving from his source, which causes him to be, probably causes him to be punctual, to be exact, to be strict, but also to be limited in some way. By contrast, the characteristic of the right is the attribute of grace, chesed, and extension in divine service, by way of expansion, without any contraction and concealment whatsoever. There is no restraint to the spirit of his generosity, whether it be with respect to charity, the study of Torah, or other commandments. He does not suffice in discharging his obligations only, but to the extent of never sufficient. So there are 2 kinds of people. People that are oriented in chesed, in kindness, expansiveness, openness. People that are more oriented in gevura, strictness, limitations. My father actually has a book called Personality Analysis Using the 10 Sefirot. It's a guide for the entangled volume 2. It's probably available via the internet. But there he has an interesting test that a person can do. Are you this? Are you that? Are you kind? Do you feel angry are you irritable? And you fill out that test, and then in the book, you will get to the result to see what kind of a person are you more? A chesed, more of a kind, expansive person, or are you more of the orientation of the strict and limited person? Neither of them being good or bad. It's just an analysis of what the person is. And here Tanya says that the root of Beit Shammai's soul is of the category of the supernal left. That is why they always decided stringently as regards all the prohibitions of the Torah. But Beis Hillel, who were of the supernal right, would find favorable arguments to be lenient and to permit the injunctions of Beit Shammai. In other words, what they were, their projection, the way they were understanding and deciding the halacha was actually a result of their nature, of the nature of their soul, from where they take their sustenance. So that's why to them, and both of them, we said, both of them have place in God's truth. Each one was looking at the prism, at the lenses, at the glasses that they were wearing based on where their soul comes from. And to each one of them, it looked so real. Maybe going back to the analogy of 2 parents, a kind one and a strict one, there could be the same scenario, and each parent will say, "Oh, the right thing to do here is this." The other parents will say, "What do you mean? The right thing to do is to give the kid a telling off." Maybe the kind parent will say, "No, the right kid is to smother the kid with love, and he's going to be okay. He's going to." Is any of them right objectively? Each one sees that they are right, because each of them comes from a different source. Each of them comes from a different nature. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel emanate from different sfirot, one from kindness, one from strictness. Let's try and understand how that will mean that one goes on potential, one goes on actuality. The Rebbe says in text 10, the root of Beit Shammai's soul is in the supernal attribute of Gevura, and Beit Hillel is rooted in Chesed. Thus Beit Shammai is stricter, and Beit Hillel is more lenient. Gevura is generally associated with concealment, while Chesed is generally associated with revelation. Accordingly, Beit Shammai focuses on the potential, Beit Hillel focuses on the practical. For potential is the concealed state, while practical is the revealed state. Let's think about strictness. Let's think how this works. Gevura generally associated with concealment. The state of being of, let's say, of a strict person. That state of being, that persona, you'll speak to them for ages. You probably walk away not knowing much more about them than when you started. It's an extreme. The expansive, the gracious, the kind person will very often be the one that's open, will speak, and you meet him for 5 minutes and know everything about his life. So there's a certain, I'm just using an analogy which I think will explain that Gevura, strictness, is a certain level of the concealment, containment. Chesed would be associated with expansiveness, which would be revelation. So Beit Shammai focuses on the potential, Beit Hillel on the practical. Potential is concealed state, more practical is the revealed state. So we have a nice explanation as to why there are two opinions regarding the menorah. And we also have an understanding why we're going like Beit Hillel, because in general we said Beit Hillel was more gracious and kind, and the transmission of what God wants, transmission of Torah, becomes more effective in the more humble person. However, still that leaves us with a few things to talk. First of all, if Beit Shammai's opinion is also right, that means, what does that tell us? It has to tell us something. What were they thinking? B, more importantly, why do we follow? In this instance, let's understand, what does the message to us that we're following Beit Hillel, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, beyond the obvious message that in holiness we have to advance, but what is it telling us on a deeper level? So let's understand in general, lighting the menorah is considered to be lighting up the darkness. In other words, we know that you cannot get rid of darkness by brooms and by mops and by so on. How can you get rid of darkness? Only one way you can get rid of darkness, that is creating light, generating light, and the light dispels the darkness. More light, more or less darkness. Exactly. What does that mean in terms of our souls? In terms of our interaction with this world, it means that the more that there is negativity, the more we need to spread light. Let's give a social example. Have you ever been in a scenario where you walk into a room and there's a lot of negative energy? People are upset, people maybe, we see it here sometimes, people come on tours. So imagine a group leader walks into the room and right away when he walks in, he's gone out to the bathroom, he sees all the people he's brought on this tour with faces that tells him something's wrong. Somebody there has told everybody the guy's ripping you off, look at the hotel he got for us, it's not that we paid more and we should get better. Now, what kind of energy do you think the tour leader needs to exhibit at this stage? If he's tired or he's low energy, turn this around, he's going to have to be so high energy, so much positivity. He's going to have to somehow exude from himself a belief that he's giving the best to the people, he's done his best, it is good. Low energy is not going to work. What happens if it's a regular day, they're sitting around and they're going from sightseeing from this location, that location, no bad energy, nobody's really in bad mood. At that time, if he's a little tired, he's a little contained, it's going to be okay. Nobody's going to... In other words, when you have a lot of negativity, you need an incredible amount of positivity to offset that. If there's lower, just regular lower levels of negativity, you can get by with less positivity. It would almost be as if we talked in the language of darkness and light. When it's very dark, I need something very bright. And when it's just, it's not so dark outside, I need a light that's not so bright. So now let's understand, when we talk about, if the menorah reminds us that we have to get rid of the darkness, brighten up the world. So let's think about this. When we start the process of getting rid of the darkness, do we need more light than when we are gradually getting it done? You need more light when you start, because the resistance is so tough. Imagine in an army, you're facing an enemy that's armed to the teeth. You gotta first of all, you gotta weaken them. You gotta put all your forces there. Then the enemy gets weakened. Now your forces can be gradually reduced because the foe, the enemy, the opposing forces will be weakened. So when we talk about dispelling the darkness, the first night of Chanukah, the darkness is still untouched. The darkness is still strong as ever. The darkness still has not been weakened. It's not been dealt any blows. It's not been started to be refined. If that is the case, then we need all guns blazing, as they say. We need all the lights on, because we're fighting the darkness. The next night, hey, you know what? The forces are starting to become thinned out. The opposing forces are starting to become weakened. And today we can do with 7 candles. It's enough. So on and so forth. The last day, you have very little resistance. 1 candle is enough. And that's the way Shammai looks at it. Now let's go back. You remember we said one of the reasons Shammai says start with 8 because it's like on Sukkot. What are we trying to do on Sukkot when we bring up the 70 oxen, the 70 bulls? We're talking about refining the world, making the world more clean, making the world more holy. Same concept as Chanukah. It's the 70 nations of the world, which represents the world the way it is before we start bringing sacrifices, but the sacrifices have the effect that they start refining all the worldly things. So on the first night, first day of Sukkot, you need full power. And each day of Sukkot, you need increasingly less. Same thing as Chanukah. That's why Beit Shammai says, hey, take a look at Sukkot. You got an example of when we try and clean something up. First do it with a lot of soap, a lot of water. Every day you can do a little less. So why does Beit Hillel say the other way? So why does Beit Hillel say do the other way? So first let's see how the Rebbe writes it in his words. The concept we just said. For some, the Yetzer Hara may have contaminated his inner sanctuary, and he now wishes to purify himself and enter under the canopy of divine grace. According to Beit Shammai, the first thing he must do is to move away from negativity, to remove the evil from your midst. When starting out, the evil is in its full strength, and therefore warrants supreme effort and abundant light. As the days progress, the evil decreases, and thus less light is needed. And continues the Rebbe at 11b. An example of this are the sacrifices offered on the days of Sukkot. These sacrifices correspond to the nations of the world, namely that the world should not be trapped by their negativity. Rather, they should be transformed to the good. Each day their negativity is diminished through this process of transformation, and thus we no longer need such a large number of sacrifices. So we understand Shammai seems to make perfect sense. You're trying to banish the darkness, boom, come out with all your forces, and then you can relax a little bit every day, a little bit more. So what does Beit Hillel say? Continues the Rebbe here in 11c. Beit Hillel says that the first ones must enter the canopy of holiness, despite the fact that the evil is prevalent inside him. He should begin divine service by doing good things, and one mitzvah leads to another, ascending in holiness little by little, gaining strength until the evil is completely eradicated. In other words, there are generally two ways a person can try and better himself. The simple way, let's give the example, I mentioned this yesterday on Shabbos in the speech, that when you want to make a house for a king, you want to first clean out the garbage and then move in the nice furnishings. And that's sur meira, turn away from evil, vasei tov, and do good. That would seem to be the more appropriate, orderly sequence of events. However, there's another way. The other way is to move in beautiful furnishings. Once you move in beautiful furnishings, automatically you will find yourself getting rid of the dirt. What's the difference between the two? Well, you know, there's, perhaps you could relate it even to the great debate between the psychologists of the previous generation, Freud and Skinner. Freud looked to the psychoanalysis and he looked to the root. He said, if the person has these issues from his youth, from his adolescence, from his early childhood, he's not going to be able to get his act together. You have to go and cleanse him, so to speak. You've got to deal with the issue at the source. There's another famous psychologist called Skinner who said it's all about how you act. If you act in the right way, you can create happiness by acting and doing the right, not doing and doing the right things can bring your happiness. And the question really is, in Jewish thought, which way do we go? Do we start by first attacking or cleansing or getting to the bottom of things and trying to cleanse it? Or are we going to start by first just doing the right thing? Step by step, and slowly, if you're involved in doing the right thing long enough and intensely enough and so on, you will change to become a better person. So there's an interesting story that he brings here. Actually, I'd never heard it. But the Alter Rebbe was once leaving from his master's home, the Maggid of Mezrich, and the Maggid of Mezrich had a son who was called Rabbi Avraham the Angel, the Malach. He was such a spiritual person that his connection to physicality, to materialism was so limited, they called him a nickname, the Angel. So he came, saw the Alter Rebbe was going to leave with horse and wagon, and he saw the Alter Rebbe looking at the horses to make sure they would be able to make the trip properly. And he called out in Yiddish, he says, "Far, far, guck nicht auf die Pferd, go, go." Stop looking at the horses. The Hasidim learned a nice lesson from this. He said, in life, you don't always have the luxury to dissect your inner horse, to look at the animal. You must continue the journey. If a person starts to self-analyze, am I really doing this with the right incentive, with the right reason? Am I really a good person? Am I not a... Stop the discussion. Stop trying to figure out if you're good, you're not good. You know what you're supposed to do. You know what the right thing to do is. Just do it. This feeling, first I have to, how can I do a good deed? How can I do something kind if really I'm self-centered? I have to first get to get rid of my self-centeredness, get rid of my selfishness, and then I'll be able to focus on doing good. Hello? Jump into doing something good.
How about sof ma'aseh machshavat tchila?
Sof ma'aseh machshavat tchila means the end of deed has to be predicated on your initial thought. Well, that's a general concept. telling us that we have to think about what we do. We're not saying here not to think. We're saying what the focus of your thought should be. The focus of your thought should be about the deeds that you can do. To think about in a self-analytical way may sometimes it may be important, but may oftentimes leave you stranded in a particular way. So now like this. In our world, we are told the law is like Beit Hillel. We need to go based not on potential, we need to go based on practical. We need to see not how hard we have to work to battle the darkness in our soul. We are told that we'd be better off just kindling a light and allowing that to illuminate ourselves, which will automatically banish the darkness. Beit Shammai, though, is talking about a deeper level. In a sense, Beit Shammai is talking about higher level people. And he says, you got to first knock out the bad, create a clean slate, create a clean space to be able to really then entertain and host God's mitzvot in you. And it says that when Mashiach will come, the law will be like Beit Shammai. Actually, the word Chanukah can also be an acronym, a Rashi Tevot. Chet of Chanukah is 8, Chet Nerot, 8 candles, V'halacha ke Beit Hillel, and the law is like Beit Hillel. But we know that the Zohar tells us that when Mashiach comes, the law will be like Beit Shammai. But that makes sense, doesn't it? If you say that Beit Shammai was more strict. When Mashiach comes, everything will be more exact. We will have more capacity to take on the negativity and zap it out, and then to rise in levels of holiness. In other words, right now, Hashem is telling us the world the way it is needs the compassion of Beit Hillel. It needs it needs to start with light, to start with positivity, not to get caught up in the negativity that may lurk in our soul. Now, this has become more and more relevant as time goes on. Not just with the advent of Hasidism, this became one of the serious mind shifts, philosophy shifts, that Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov said, just focus on doing good and focus on joy, and that ultimately will cause you also to abstain from the bad. But don't get so deeply engrossed in battling the bad. Embrace the light. That will automatically take your attention away from the negativity. Another thing is that in our day and age, interestingly, in our 7th generation of Chabad, our Rebbe said very much what to focus on. Just do another mitzvah. That's where the mitzvah tanks come from, the mitzvah campaigns. Just start doing one mitzvah. You'll see that will, like Beit Hillel. You do one today, you'll see that tomorrow you'll do 2. The next day you'll do 3, 4, and 5, and so on. But interesting that in the world has moved also to that kind of thought and behavior. We all remember going to school, and I remember in Australia, Mr. Stewart, the headmaster of the school, had a cane, or as they said in Australia, a cane. And he didn't use it often, but once in a while he gave a flogging. I don't know, it was called a flogging, or 6 whacks on the backside with a cane. I'm not talking in the 1700s, I'm talking early 1980s. Slowly that became unacceptable. There are some sad results of that becoming unacceptable, maybe, but it became unacceptable. And today society believes today that there's other ways of doing things, positive reinforcement. Now, to say that a child doesn't need to be disciplined at all is a mistake and is wrong and can lead to horrible things. On the other hand, it seems to be a shift in thinking of the outside world, but as we can see, there's also a shift in the emphasis of our Jewish world, in the way that we, across the board today, Jewish communities will accept, in a compassionate way, people in the way of Hillel. It's the general consensus amongst Jews. Very observant Jews today is that we need to be welcoming. We need to encourage people to do one more mitzvah, not focus on how many sins they're doing, but focus on how many more mitzvahs they can be doing. Because one will lead to diminishing of doing the wrong thing as well. So the holiday of Chanukah reminds us in a very, very clear way that we need to add light. And here we have there's another very beautiful story. There's a story of Rabbi Manis Friedman, the dean of Beit Chana's Women's Cemetery. Beit Chana's Women's Seminary. It's a cemetery for evil inclinations. That's where negative impulses are put to rest. They're killed there. That's what a cemetery should be, for bad things to be buried there. But otherwise, I'm talking here about a women's seminary. He told the story of a young Jewish woman in Minnesota who wanted to marry but was unsuccessful because she was self-centered. Whenever she met a man, she only spoke about herself. She was seeing one psychologist after another, who all analyzed her past and diagnosed her as a classic narcissist, who saw the entire world around her as a mirror. They explained to her all of the psychological reasons governing her behavior. They explained to her how this flaw stemmed from the primal formations of her psyche. They probably explained that her mother got it from her mother, or got it from her mother, all the way to Eve, to Chava, who ate from the tree. And this is why she was afraid to open up to people. But after all that therapy, she was not helped. She still could not manage to change her behavior. Rabbi Manis Friedman suggested that she consult with the Rebbe. This is obviously in a time where you can get a private audience with the Rebbe. She presented a sheaf of papers to the Rebbe with the analyses of her doctors and said, "These are my problems." The Rebbe, who was a speed reader, leafed through the stack of papers within moments. Then he put them down. She figured that he had politely glanced through the papers but hadn't read them. The Rebbe said, "Okay, so now what's the problem?" Stunned by this, she said, "What?" The Rebbe said, "I don't understand the problem." "Did you read it?" she asked. "Yes, I read it," said the Rebbe. "What do you mean there's no problem?" she said. "I've been in therapy for years and psychologists have made hundreds of dollars off me every week. How can you say there's no problem? I'm self-centered." The Rebbe said, "I hear, but I don't understand the problem." She began telling the Rebbe about her mother and grandmother. The Rebbe said, "I'm not asking for your history now. That's written here in these papers. I'm asking what your problem is now." She said, "The problem is that I'm self-centered. I'm completely egoistic. I have no space for others. I can't let anyone in my life. It's ruining my life. I'm just simply selfish." "So stop being selfish," said the Rebbe. She looked at the Rebbe as though to say, "Is this what I came to hear?" She came to the great sage. She wanted to hear something. The Rebbe went on. "If you listen to me, when you go back to your school and you're in the dining room, you'll offer to bring to the girls sitting and eating whatever they need for their meal. Do this at every meal." She told the Rebbe that this behavior was impossible for her. The Rebbe said, "This is what it means to think about someone else." She went back to Minnesota and listened to the Rebbe's advice. The other girls responded positively to her overtures, and within weeks, her relationships were transformed. Today she's married and has a beautiful family. Concludes Rabbi Friedman, you want to stop being selfish? You don't always have to analyze it for years. Just do favors for people. Do one favor a day for a person and you will stop being selfish. In other words, don't think your way into good living. Live your way into good thinking. Start with the action. Now, of course, I'm not talking, God forbid, if somebody's severely, has real mental illness and so on. That's a tragedy and that has to be dealt with professionals and very often needs medicine and so on. We're talking about things that psychologists deal with. And here the message of Chanukah is simply kindle a light. Get out there and do it. Very, very often when somebody's down, not feeling motivated, Really what I have to focus in is what's the next thing I have to do. And the next thing I have to do has two choices, a light or a darkness. And we have to make sure to kindle the light. Usually when we look at life, it's overwhelming. But if we look at, okay, now it's almost 12 o'clock, what do I have to do now? There's usually one thing. And it's usually a right thing or a wrong thing. I could say, oh, I'm not motivated, I'm just going to go to sleep. Well, if you're tired and you need energy, maybe that would be the right thing. But if you're doing it to escape, hey, you know that you put on your task. It's Sunday, 12 o'clock, you should really go stock up on groceries for the house. Go do it. That's the right thing right now. You wake up in the morning, hey, there's a right thing and a wrong thing. The right thing is to say your prayers, to say the Shema. Get up and say the Shema. The wrong thing is to put a snooze for another 10 minutes. There's no two. Very often, all we have is a choice at any given moment, turn right or turn left. And what we're told is stop analyzing so much. Turn on a light, kindle the light, and it will increase, and that in turn will help you. It will banish the darkness. So maybe a happy Chanukah for everybody. Let's keep on increasing in goodness and kindness and happiness until God Almighty gives us the opportunity to kindle the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash with the coming of Mashiach. Amen. Happy Chanukah. I think you touched the red one.
Okay. No. Okay.